and welcome to today's session. We are excited to discuss the 3 trends in cloud native and observability you need to know. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm senior analyst here at ESG, and I'm your moderator for today's session. I'm joined today with Rachel Dines and Rob Streschay. Rachel, would you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Dines, and I run product and technical marketing for Chronosphere.
Great. Now, Rob, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Rob Streschay, also a senior analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and I cover cloud and observability. I'm super psyched to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Let's get started. So as we get started in this presentation, we want to talk to you today, and we feel, we want to share a lot of data with you, right? But we know that the world is constantly evolving, and cloud native and observability are key areas in this change. Often organizations are looking for ways to optimize and manage how applications are performing. When organizations are looking to modernize, there are many different approaches that they can take because it just really depends on where they are in their own journey. So when you're looking at traditional applications or heritage applications, maybe those heritage or traditional applications start by being virtualized. And from the virtualized approach, maybe they then move to a containerized environment. And then from there, maybe they move to a fully cloud native or an elastic environment. So there's different stages of modernizing those applications. And today what we're going to do is investigate how these applications are being developed as well as being monitored. So the key areas we'll focus on is cloud native adoption and the benefits and challenges associated with that. We'll see and talk about the observability impact of business outcomes. We'll also look at the requirements and the observability solutions that basically are put in place to provide a highly available and resilient environment. And while we go through this, we'll also look at the data that's supporting this approach. But before we get into the whole presentation, the data, I really wanted to kind of qualify this by providing, it's not just Rob or myself or Rachel kind of just saying some great things about what we think in this space, but we've surveyed a lot of, extensive research in this space to find out what the industry is doing. So what we've done is ESG overall has done research and conducted studies in 44 different research studies. We also have over 20,000 surveys and interviews that have been completed over 29 different countries. So there's a nice grouping of data that's representative across the entire industry. And that subset of information is being pulled on to use in this study. So in this research. So we're really excited about that information. And as we kind of go through it and we talk about cloud native organizations are really looking to, basically grow, right? They're trying to grow their environments and they're trying to expand, but they're also trying to expand with operational efficiencies in mind, right? But this is due to the rapid response to the customer journey. Customers are changing their dynamics and prospects are looking at websites and whatever it may be for applications. And all of that needs to be adjusted pretty rapidly in order to evolve to today's business needs. But overall, modernization needs to grow and businesses are looking to do this rapidly. So when we looked at our first study, we found that cloud native is really the preferred way to deliver faster time to value over traditional applications. We see that organizations are leveraging cloud native as a way to basically run and deploy and deliver faster time to value over traditional applications. As we see here, 90% of respondents indicated that this is a faster way to drive business results and respond to those business KPIs. But it's not just about faster time to value, it's also about many other advantages. In this data set, what we found is a lot of advantages that we see with moving to cloud natives. You gain things, organizations gain things like developer velocity or application portability, and also the ability to leverage heritage and modernized app infrastructures as well. And when we look at this and we think about this, it makes a lot of sense because if you're in your heritage environment, it's very difficult to move that information from one set of data to another, especially if you're in different locations. So if you're looking at application portability and organizations that are looking at moving from, say, the data center to the edge to a cloud environment, application portability allows for that. But monitoring and managing that information is also key. But when we look at all these great advantages, it comes with a challenge as well. So when we look at moving to a modernized approach, it does come with a challenge, but organizations need to overcome these challenges, right? And a couple of areas that we see the growth and move to cloud native, we see that the areas that organizations need to focus on are things like security and compliance, but also observability are the main obstacles that organizations see. But so when we look at this, Rachel, I'm curious to see how Chronosphere addresses or deals with these cloud native application challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see the top two big challenges here are both in the security world. And given I'm not a security expert, I'm not going to focus in on that. But on that third line there, where you can see that 29%, so almost a third of companies say that a lack of performance monitoring and observability is a top challenge in cloud native. And this is something that we see quite a bit as well in the market. We work with some of the largest consumers of cloud native environments in the world and companies that are just getting started on their cloud native journey. And the thing that I see across all of these types of customers is that when you make the shift to cloud native, compared to your previous architecture, infrastructure as a service, VM based, whether it's in the public cloud or the data center, there is a massive amount more of monitoring data. We're going to talk about this more a little bit later, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But if you just think about moving from like monolithic applications to microservices, or from VMs to containers, the amount of data that there is to monitor is huge. And then on top of that, cloud native architectures are by nature ephemeral, right? So if you think about, the life cycle of a VM being in the months or maybe even years, the lifespan of a container is in minutes. So data, if you're monitoring all of that infrastructure, like being able to keep track of all of that when it's ephemeral, and then all of the complex interdependencies just mean that, like, if you had a monitoring or an APM application performance monitoring solution that worked well for you previously, it might not perform well in the cloud native world. And so what we see is that a lot of people need to figure out, okay, I need a new approach. I need to figure out a new way to do monitoring and observability. And if I want to be able to take advantage of all of the great benefits that, Paul, you just talked about, like, faster velocity, improved performance, and you don't have observability up to where it needs to be, like, you're going to struggle to take advantage of all the benefits of cloud native. So it's really interesting to see this one come high up on the list.
Yeah, I mean, those are great points. And, so Rachel, when you're talking about the points and such, it's obvious that observability has a significant impact on businesses and the business outcomes. We see this, and there's just a lot of data that actually supports this. And, when we see this, not just observability in the data, but it's also increasing in scale, that also addresses that faster time to production. So we definitely see that as well. And, and Rob, I want to bring you into the conversation because I know that you've done a lot of research and focus in this area. Could you expand a little bit to talk about, how teams are managing the data?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think that some of the benefits that the teams are getting out of it is really, or they're trying to achieve, is really, how do you tie what's going on in what you're seeing in your infrastructure to the business KPIs? How do you understand if you're meeting your SLAs, or how do you know if you're meeting and improving your customer experience? And I think a big piece of it is that really 37% of people that we talked to said that executives outside of IT were taking a look at the data, which was just kind of mind-blowing to us when we got the data back. But it kind of makes sense, because if you're becoming more digitally native and you're running more applications that are your life source of revenue for your company, the people outside IT and outside development are going to really start to take notice of this. And I think one of the things that really, jumped to the top was that the vast majority, almost up to the top half here, when you start to get into, because people took multiple responses in this grouping, almost everybody had at least one of these business KPIs was driving really their use of the data. And really the managing of data, as kind of Rachel kind of alluded to before, was really a topic of conversation throughout this entire survey. And Rachel, we saw that 71% of companies are really concerned about how much data is, how much data growth there is. How is Chronosphere really, helping those organizations, get a handle on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting statistic, and this is probably my favorite little nugget that came out of this survey. It's so fascinating to see that 71%, so almost 3/4 of companies are concerned that their observability data is growing fast. This is entirely consistent with what we see as well. So I was alluding to this a few moments ago, that as you go from the on-premises world and the data center to cloud and VM based to cloud native, the amount of observability data just starts to skyrocket. And along with the volume of data increasing, you can imagine costs start to increase as well. And so what I've seen, and what I saw even prior to joining Chronosphere, was that companies would have to make some tough decisions around, I guess we're not going to monitor the lab anymore. I guess we don't get to collect data anymore on this type of environment. And it was very much like an all or nothing, like in order to try and push this curve down to, reduce that increase. Because look, if we were collecting more observability data and getting better outcomes, it might be okay, right? Like, all right, I'm spending a lot more on observability monitoring, but our mean time to resolution is faster, our mean time to detection is faster. That might be a trade-off you would be willing to take, right? But unfortunately, it's going the opposite direction. It's like we have more observability data, and then our cycle times are longer. Our customers are having greater impacts. So something's got to give here, right? Like we can't have more data, paying more for it, and getting a worse outcome. And that's honestly, what we're seeing in a lot of organizations. It's not uncommon, and you might be experiencing this as well if you're watching this webinar, that you might be paying more for your observability than you are for your production applications. So one of the big benefits of working with Chronosphere is that we really give customers choice and control when it comes to observability data. So we know that not all of your data is really created equally, right? Some of it has more or less inherent value to your organization. So you should be able to tune the observability data to what's valuable to you. So let's take the lab again, for example. Instead of turning off observability in the lab, what if you just reduce the retention, reduce the resolution, reduce the granularity? So maybe you only need it every 15 minutes and you only keep it for a week because the lab data is torn down every week. But for your mission critical systems, you want to have that, 30-second increments, keep that for 13 months. You want to have all your tags and labels. You want to have all of this rich data. And so with Chronosphere, we kind of allow you to tune this, and so you can make the choices that you need to make aligned to the business. And this comes back to, on the previous slide, that improved ability to tie IT operations to business KPIs was one of the top benefits that customers are looking for in monitoring and observability. And this really resonated with me because, we look at observability from the full stack, from the infrastructure to the applications to the business. And our customers use Chronosphere not only to do, the low-level infrastructure metrics that we're pulling from Prometheus, application metrics, but also business metrics. So, one of our customers is DoorDash. They use Chronosphere to see like how many dashers are on the road, how many orders are being placed. Then they look at their, their traditional red metrics, and they look at low-level infrastructure metrics too, all in one place. And having that full stack and being able to see across all of these different layers is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, as we delve down into those personas of what people are using observability, it's not just IT admins. As I kind of alluded to earlier, 37% are saying that executives outside of IT are using it and the monitoring and observability tools for exactly why somebody at DoorDash would be doing that. It's part of it is their business. And so they're using it to understand the digital native parts of their business. I think what was also super interesting is that finance does show up quite often. Again, this is another multiple response, but when you start to look at it, at least a quarter of the people responding, or about 12%, selected it as one of their top people that they have to feed data to, and are using those metrics. And I think as you start to look down here, the ones that you would expect that are up top are executives And I think it's the fact that IT ops, IT executives are really trying to understand what's going on. But what you also see is that it's a wide swath of the personas within your organization are probably very interested in this data, probably at different granularities, as Rachel was talking about, which really keys off of the fact that you need to be able to tune what you're getting, how you're getting it, and how it's being presented. Paul, I think that, again, this was one of those things where, job title didn't necessarily mean how valuable the data was, and the data may be different from one of the personas to another. And I think that's been, something very interesting that we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I mean, well, first I want to say, well, who doesn't love DoorDash? I mean, I can't pretty much go a week without using DoorDash, but agreed. I think that the personas and how people use the tools really matter in the success of the overall business and what they're doing, again, a complete view of how the data is being used. It's absolutely true. And when we look at, understanding these challenges, the next logical question we would have to ask, I think, is to understand how businesses are being impacted and what requirements they need to be resilient, right? And when we're looking at this, and Rob, I know when we looked at some of this data earlier and we were kind of going through it, the data in our survey highlights deployment and operational requirements. What does that mean to you, and how do maybe you can give me your commentary on that, because I think that plays into the story.
Oh, definitely. And I think that, again, a big piece of it is if you can't get it up and get it running, you're in trouble, right? And a tool is just a tool, but if you can't implement it, get the metrics and measure it, it really becomes a problem. And I think one of the things, and this is not surprising at all, is that scale and reliability during deployment. How do I do this at scale? As Rachel and I was talking about earlier, the amount of data you're taking in from so many different places, from so many other different tools and applications, or, hey, you're being able to go and implement it and instrument your different logging on the applications. Getting this all set up is pretty tough. And I think across the board, it wasn't too surprising that organizations were struggling with that, and making that a requirement of ease of use, ease of deployment is pretty huge. I think that, again, when you start to look at this, one of the ones that popped up as well in here, the third one down on cultural resistance, is not too surprising either, because it's changing. As people become more digitally native, they have to look at things in a different way, measure them in a different way. And that's not easy. So it's not just about the technology, it's how you use that technology, how you tune the technology. And that's a big piece of it, like what Rachel was saying, and what granularity do you get to can help make those different people, different personas that we were talking about a minute ago, very comfortable with the data. Not only that, and I'll kind of jump into the operational requirements, is that you really, again, when you're running it, you're going to be running it at scale. I mean, these, digitally native applications, cloud native applications, plus you probably have some pieces of this on premise still, and you want to be able to join that data together. So doing that at scale really becomes a critical piece of it. Also, you really want to understand all of the different components and how they tie together. It's really, they change all the time, as Rachel was saying. The ephemeral nature of the cloud-based applications really leads itself to a lot of changing. And those applications are, sometimes being updated on an hourly to daily basis, which is pretty amazing when you start to think about the rate of change and how the monitoring and observability aspects of this have to be able to handle that rate of change and things and correlate them and bring them together. And I think that, Rachel, you guys see this on a day-to-day basis. How is Chronosphere really helping customers deal with that rate of change and all of these operational and deployment challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is that Chronosphere is a SaaS platform that was built from the ground up for the scale and complexity of cloud native. So we're not trying to retrofit an existing, solution. We were built from the ground up. And actually, Jill, take you on a brief history lesson, actually. So I think it's very interesting. Our founders, Martin Mao and Rob Skillington, were running they were at Uber in 2014, 2015, and they became tasked with running observability for Uber. They were really early adopters of cloud native. They were using, containerized infrastructure when most of us were not thinking about containers quite yet because they were leading edge. And they went looking for a solution that could meet their needs to do monitoring and observe. Wasn't called observability back then, but to do monitoring, they needed metrics, they needed logs, they needed traces, and they couldn't find anything in the market that would fit their needs. There was nothing in the open source world. There was nothing in the commercial SaaS world. So they went and they built their own solution that, once again, was built from the ground up to meet that scale and complexity of cloud native. Fast forward a few years, they built a solution, a backend for metrics that they open sourced. They then later left and founded Chronosphere, using that open source backend as the backbone to this very scalable and highly resilient SaaS platform for metrics monitoring. And now we've recently added tracing as well. But the reason I went down that little path is that the thing that I find in common with so many people adopting cloud native is that they're growing very quickly. So when I say scale and scaling, I don't mean that you're the size of DoorDash, you're the size of Uber today. Not all of our customers are. A lot of our customers, they're changing and growing and moving really fast. When you're doing all of that, reliability and scalability are so important. I would have thought this was table stakes. I thought this was table stakes a couple of years ago, but it's really not. Chronosphere offers the best contract SLA for any SaaS solution on the market for observability. It's 2 to 5 times more reliable than the competition. We can do this because it's a single tenanted architecture and it's multi-cloud. And the reason we do this is because we know that observability systems, monitoring systems, can't have downtime. If you have downtime in your monitoring system at the same time as your production environment, that is like your worst day. That is the worst case scenario, because your production systems are down and you have no idea what's going on. And unfortunately, this happens to a lot of companies. So being able to have that very, very high levels of reliability and scalability is very, very important. And so it's interesting to me to see that this was at the top of the list with 23%. People saying it was a challenge. There are a bunch of other challenges in here as well that we work with customers on, this inability to correlate data from multiple data sources in a timely fashion. This is a really important one for us as well. With Chronosphere, we've seen our customer base being able to detect and then remediate issues up to 7 times faster because we can ingest so much data. We primarily focus on Prometheus and OpenTelemetry, but you can send us any kind of open source metrics and trace data, and we correlate it and can alert on it and drive to triage and root cause analysis much faster than the competition. So I could go on for a long time about this, but this is such a fascinating area. And seeing this survey data come back very closely aligned to what we see in the market too, just shows, but I think ESG and Chronosphere, we both have a good pulse on the market.
Yeah, it's always good to see that when it comes back, that it's something you expected, but again, like you said, I thought it was table stakes as well. And I think that's super interesting, but I'll throw it back to Paul.
Yeah, no, Rachel, I have a question for you that is kind of appropriate on this slide. It's when we kind of go through this data, it's really interesting to see the different perspectives. But there's one thing that I also feel and I see in our research is there's also challenges with like IT skill gaps and such. And when we realized that in some of our research we found that 67% of organizations are actually hiring IT generalists over specialists over the next 12 to 18 months. From that perspective, I've seen the Chronosphere offering. I've been in many briefings with you. I've done some extensive research. Can you maybe touch a little bit on that? Because I think that's important for the audience to know. It's a robust platform, but there's also an ease of use that goes along with it.
Yeah, it's a really great point and something we hadn't touched on as of yet. Skills and the ability to, find people that are up to speed on cloud native is like, it's, hiring right now is crazy. If anyone out there is trying to hire, I know I am. It's very challenging. It's a very hot market. So yeah, a few things on that topic. First of all of the ins and outs of Chronosphere are based on open source standards. So you write data in with Prometheus, or if you're not using Prometheus yet, StatsD, Graphite, also fine. We can pull in open telemetry and Jaeger and Zipkin traces. So you write data in with all the open source standards that you're already familiar with. Similarly, you pull data out with open source standards. So you query with PromQL, you can use Grafana compatible dashboards, Prom Alert Manager. So all of the ins and outs are so if your developers are using open source tooling today, they're going to find Chronosphere very natural. They already know how to use it, compatible with all of these existing systems. And broader than that, really our focus is on, embracing the open source standards, because that's what we find the majority of developers want to use, and they have those skills already. So you don't need to, retrain them up on a new SaaS solution. You don't need to go out, deploy a bunch of new agents, rip out your old agents. Because again, it's all based on the open source standards. But unfortunately, running the open source solutions in-house can be very, very time consuming and have challenges with reliability. So I was talking recently with a customer that used to run, Prometheus in-house with a Thanos backend, and they realized they were just devoting like 25% of their SRE time just to running their observability stack. And once they switched over to Chronosphere and they got that SRE on working on some broader initiatives like defining monitoring and metrics standards and getting SLO standards across all the teams, they were able to get that person out of running observability full time and onto more things that were going to move the needle for that company. And so then they could spend a lot less time running observability. So there's a lot of people components to this. And increasingly, we're seeing a function emerge that I would call the central observability team. It's usually a function within engineering or within SRE, site reliability engineering, that is responsible for running and deploying the tooling, and their constituents, their customers are all of the individual developer teams and engineers. They need to make sure their systems are reliable, coming back to that, and that that the engineers and the teams know how to use them. They have the templates they need. They're being consistent. And so making sure that, we're one of the few solutions out there that kind of caters to and provides capabilities for this central team that needs to, that they have a kind of a different set of standards that they're thinking about versus individual engineers and developers.
Yeah, and thank you, Rachel. I mean, because I think that is an important point to kind of call out in this presentation, because, one of the things that, you definitely hear about a lot is a lot of organizations are in maintenance mode. And if they're in maintenance mode, they're not innovating, right? And so this is giving them the opportunity to release some of those, high value skills and to focus on that innovation that organizations are really trying to get to. So key points. So I think it's important. I hope the audience understands and sees that as well, because I think it's definitely key. I know that that's something that we see a lot in our research. But when we look at this, I know we're coming to the end. We just touched on a couple of key areas. There's a lot of data in this space, and there's definitely a lot of information. And when we look at what we feel, what we see and hear from organizations is information is key. That organizations are looking to monetize and grow their cloud native environments. They're really trying to, and deployments. They're trying to grow it, but they also are looking at utilizing microservices and cloud native architectures, because it's really becoming the preferred way to deliver cloud and basically production applications. So if they're trying to deliver their production applications, they're delivering them on a cloud native approach. But cloud native is about that rapid responsiveness, right? But also agility and efficiency. So you have the ability to do that. And as we talked about some of the key points that we just touched on in this presentation, monitoring and management is critical to the overall success. So as we look at this, what we also want to do is provide you with some additional data. As I said, we really just touched on a couple of key points here, in kind of salient points on this presentation to kind of get you interested and see if there's areas that you want to look at. But as you're looking through the research, both Chronosphere and ESG has put together these ebooks that allow you to kind of get a little bit more in depth, a little bit more educated about the topic, and understand where this information is coming from. Because organizations like yourself are also dealing with these struggles, so you're not in it alone, right? You can see how other organizations are doing it and dealing with it as well. But with that, Rachel, I want to thank you for your time today. Rob, I want to thank you as well, and I encourage thank the audience as well for attending. And I encourage you to download the ebooks and take a look at this information. Thank you and have a great day.